Hey guys, welcome to episode 53 of the 1023 Soul Shop Talk podcast. Today we're going to talk reliability and the 3 points that matter when determining how, if you should and if you do decide to modify your truck, how to choose the right parts. This is something you can kind of put into your pipeline of making decisions. Really what it comes down to, and a lot of what the show has always been, is taking these are the best parts for you, because that's hard to determine. There's way too many factors that go into deciding that. We can kind of dive into that somewhat, but what I think is more helpful is to kind of show the logic that we use when trying to determine that with each individual person. And so today is going to be just purely on like what the word reliability means, what people usually mean by it, because that's a very common thing. People will come in and they'll say, I want to do this build or I want to do this with my truck and I just want it to be reliable. Well, we've kind of broken it down to 3 different points of what that means, and we're going to dig into each one of those and explain like where that fits into determining the right parts for your build. So the first one is when people say they want something that's reliable, usually the first one's going to be, you want to look at is, you want it to be as low a chance as possible of having a failure of some kind. So the lowest chance possible it's going to need to be repaired because something failed. That's kind of key point number 1. That's the first big reason what people mean by reliable, but that's not it. The second one is that you want to be as easy as possible to diagnose if there is a failure of some kind, like how much time is going to go into it. And then the second thing is, or the last one is, the third point is going to be, you want to be as easy as possible to source the parts, as quick as possible to source the parts to replace whatever failed. And the reason why all of those matter when we're talking about reliability is there's always something. If you're going for more power, you're going for more performance, you're trying to like increase the performance of your truck, there's something you're probably going to be giving up on one of those 3 pains, and it may be worth it. And this is where we've had so many discussions on here in the past, and there's certainly plenty of people who appreciate it and plenty of people who will criticize it and say like, all you care about is stock trucks, you're anti-performance or whatever. Listen, man, that's not the case. What I care about is that the end result is as good as it can be, and that you completely understand going into it if there's going to be the chance, or if there's going to be the compromise or a chance of some compromise of some kind, that you understand that and you make that choice consciously. And it does matter, because everything about these trucks, and same thing for mostly the aftermarket also, a lot of time and engineering went into designing the truck to be what it is. If we're going to deviate from that, there's got to be a very good reason for it, and there's got to be a good reason. We've got to have a good understanding of what the consequences of deviating might be. And consequences does not mean that it's bad. It's just going to be different, and is that okay? So that's what we're looking at. So the first one is, the first example is, you want to have as low a chance as possible of having a failure of some kind, and that can cover stuff like you don't want to have. You would want to buy good parts that are like, don't buy cheap parts, right? You don't want to buy junk stuff to put in the truck. That could also be deciding, how high of a power level you want to go to. Just one big example that everybody can relate to is, well, you wouldn't want to try to make 800 horsepower in a stock 2002, 2003, 7.3 with PMRs, right? Like that would be a major component failure at that point. The engine can't handle that. So that's a very just like obvious point. But that's what we're looking at is, the first thing to determine what could go wrong, and like what are the chances? The chances are going to be much higher if you buy like cheap junk parts or used parts or something like that. The second one being, you want to be as easy as possible to diagnose. So figure out what's wrong with the truck if you have a failure. And the reason why that matters is if you look at one big discussion that we have all the time is, and specifically with 7.3s, and it varies by truck. I just want to share the logic. Is when on like a Super Duty 7.3, when you get away from stock injectors, meaning the AD code or AB code injectors that were in the Super Duty from the factory, when you get away from those injectors, it doesn't matter what size you go with. If it's, stage 1 injector, so an AC code or 160, whatever you want to call it. If you go to a, stage 1.5, like a 180/30, a 205/80, a 205/30, a 250/100, doesn't matter. If you go with anything that's not stock, the truck will no longer idle like it used to. It won't start like it used to. You can expect that it might smoke more when it's cold because there's a lot more variables. There's a lot of variables that go into making sure that it doesn't, and a lot that can affect those. And so when you're looking at deciding, well, what leaps do I want to take, keep in mind that, what if you get, your stage 1.5 injectors in your truck, really popular, right? You put those in your truck, and now the truck, it has a little bit of it feels like a miss or a tick or something at idle just when it's warm. Could there be something wrong with the injectors? Maybe. I mean, this is something we're into all the time. What else was replaced when you replaced the injectors? Was that the first time you dug into the truck? It could be that you flipped the harnesses back and they hadn't been moved in 20 years, and now maybe one of the wires is damaged in your harnesses. Maybe one of the pins isn't right. Maybe it's your tuning. Maybe the tuning has a problem. Maybe it doesn't. But the problem is now you can't just remove the chip from the equation and then determine does the truck run correctly without tuning, because the truck requires tuning in order to run correctly. But correctly doesn't mean the way it used to run. And so all of this matters, and that's just an example. But so the first thing, what are the chances, the lowest chance possible of having a failure of some kind, be reliable, and then easy as possible to diagnose, be the other one. The last one is as easy as possible to source the parts, and this is where you have to determine for yourself. If you are constantly changing your build, or you're fine with changing to something else if you need to because the parts you wanted aren't easily available or readily available, then you can go a little crazier with it. This aspect of what does reliable mean, it doesn't matter as much if you're fine with changing things on a whim. But anything from if you put an aftermarket intake on the truck, well, like a 6637 filter, it's a really common modification guys will do to these trucks, right? You can go buy that filter, your big honking air filter, whatever you want to call it. You can go buy a big 4-inch filter from Napa. Pretty much at every Napa, they're in every town ever. If there's a McDonald's, you can probably buy the filter because there's probably a Napa there. But what if you look at something like an AFE intake, right? Maybe it's one that gets outdated and it's not available anymore. What if it's like a less popular intake that now you can't find the filters for? You need to try to find a different replacement because the one you wanted wasn't available. What if there's only a couple shops online that sell them? So that's stuff to think about. How quickly will you need the parts you're buying? And this doesn't go for intakes. This goes for intakes or injectors or turbos or up pipes or harnesses, whatever it is. But when you're looking at modifying the truck, this is stuff that matters. This is the logic that goes into deciding these things. And I guess another example would be, when you are looking at injectors. Well, let's do this example. Let's do turbos, okay? If you get, let's say, a KC turbo, they're really popular, and they're also rebuildable. So if you have a turbo and it fails and it's something that's not completely catastrophic, you start having a bearing failure, you determine that that's the problem. And, it's fairly similar to stock in that, functionally, it's like stock. KC stocks the parts. Nobody's going to stock them locally to you. If you look at upgrading the turbo, if you're on a 7.3, you go with a T4, go with a T4 kit instead of a drop-in turbo, let's say. Well, if you had a drop-in turbo and your turbo fails and you're, towing your horses across the country and you went from the West Coast in, now you're in, whatever, Kentucky. I don't know. Anyway, you're traveling across the country, you're towing a trailer, and your turbo blows up. You don't want to be maybe you don't want to be sitting there for days at a time waiting for a replacement, KC turbo, or you don't want to be sitting there waiting for a replacement T4 turbo, because now you have to determine what it is, where are you going to find it, how do you make sure it's the right one, how do you make sure the housings are right, and maybe there's a shortage of them. Whatever it is, if you have a stock style turbo, maybe it's not ideal, but you can go get a stock turbo, or you can go get a stock turbo. Or a drop-in replacement turbo, probably a lot easier than you can find a T4 turbo, or specifically a KC turbo faster. So these are all things that matter when you're deciding how far do you want to go. And one of the things that happens in discussions, all the time when we're talking with people about their builds, is guys are looking for, almost everyone says they want reliability, but you have to get down to what are you okay with sacrificing, or what do you want to improve. Those are the things to consider. So anyway, I appreciate you guys listening. Hopefully this is helpful. If you want to dig more into stuff like this, we certainly can. I've said this in the past. Sometimes it's like there are so many types of things to cover, and I don't want to go way too deep into something and make it confusing, and I don't want to make it too broad that it's not useful. On top of that, we're just incredibly busy, and sometimes it's hard to be inspired about what to talk about, especially when we spend all day talking about these things on the phone. It's like, I don't know, whatever your job is, I'm sure whenever you get done with it, there's times where you just go, ugh, I don't want to talk about that anymore. I've been doing that all day or all week or all month or all year or whatever it is. But I do care about this. I care a lot about making sure that people make the right choices. That's why we have our build plans. If you are looking at building your truck, you can go on our website, just 1023, so 1023diesel.com, and click on the plan your build or plan my build, whatever it says, tab. You can schedule a time, you can sit down, and we can kind of work through these things together for 30, 40 minutes. And that's pretty helpful. But I don't want that to be mandatory. I want to give you guys the tools that are needed in a somewhat short form like this, where hopefully you can be thinking about this as you're buying parts, like thinking through all the ways that what you're buying could affect the way the truck is going to be usable down the road. That's what we're looking for. But I appreciate you guys listening. I've got some longer shows that are coming up with manufacturers. And the reason that they're taking a little bit longer to put together, I want to put the time ahead of time into them, is I want them to be really good. So we've got really detailed notes about specifically how we're going to design the conversation around solving the problems that, solving the problems by asking the questions that are really relevant to the person who manufactures the part. That's what we're looking to do. And so a lot of time has to go into that. But I've got a couple people lined up now that are very willing, and they're honestly just waiting on me to finish building out the plan for the conversation, so it can be as useful as possible. And if you're going to put 30, 40 minutes, an hour into listening to it, I want it to be actually useful and take something away from it, along with notes. I'm going to include the notes along with the conversation, so you have something to kind of go back and reference, even print out or whatever. So it's I can keep this with me and make it really simple to answer these questions down the road. And we just want it to be, as public and useful as possible. But appreciate you guys listening. There will be more of this coming, possibly some fairly big news about what that's going to look like. If you guys need parts, 1023.com. You can give us a call, 1-833-773-1023, and we're happy to chat about your build. We'll see you guys later.